So first of all, thank you for the invitation. Always happy to be in Vienna. And as Cesare was saying, so yes, so I will try to discuss or put a bit in perspective the work we have been doing in more or less recent years, which deals with the metal-ceria interfaces, in general metal oxide interfaces for the conversion of methane. And so why we care about this, despite the fact that some administrations don't believe about this global warming and things like that. And without getting into politics, I think I do believe. So, of course, we do know that methane and also CO2 are two greenhouse gases, and we know what are the consequences of that. So here we have two options. One option would be to say, well, let's produce less of them, to produce less of these greenhouse gases, but if you cannot, at least we can try to convert them to something useful. And these two molecules are very stable molecules in the gas phase. And in order to think about any conversion, you have to start thinking about catalysts. And this is the idea with the whole talk is about how these molecules will get activated or on a catalyst. And the question is which catalyst is good for that. And so I always like to show this. So we have these challenges, and this stands from this document, which is the kind of work of the roadmap of catalysis in Europe. And in this document, one can get something like this. And one reads that we have to face these challenges, the evolving energy scenarios, but also a cleaner future. And in this document, it says in order to face these grand challenges, we need new approaches. And these new approaches means addressing complexity. And these approaches to catalysts has to be based on knowledge, it says. And this I like because it says that we need to advance the design of novel systems, but this advancement has to be based on understanding the catalyst from the molecular to the industrial scale. And understanding catalyst from the molecular scale is exactly what we do. So I think this puts in perspective that this is necessary to understand this. And why you have to understand this is based on being convinced that if you are able to understand at the molecular level, then you will be able to establish what people call structure, not general geometry, but also electronic structure in general, function relation, in this case, catalytic function. And once you have understood, we'll be able to maybe help or aid in the rational design of better system or even novel systems. So this is the scenario in which this talk works. And again, so we talk about these two molecules, methane and CO2. These are very stable, as I said. So you need high temperature. But then I will come back. There is issue of selectivity, that you get what you want and not something else. And of course, these molecules have carbon. So typically, you may get carbon deposition, and the thing, of course, doesn't work. So as of choices of catalysts, of course, expensive metals always work. But this is probably, you don't want to have it. And then you may try to alloy expensive with non-expensive. This also could be a possibility. But the other possibility is to use some kind of low-loaded system. So if it's a bit expensive, maybe it's not so dramatic, but still, and kind of hold it on a support. And the support will be an oxide. And in this case is a cerium oxide. And I will come back to this. So this work is, I will talk about theory, matching here and there a bit about the experimental results. And the basic idea is here. So in order to make some progress, our work is here. This is the theoretical model catalyst, but we need to work, or we do work in close contact with people doing the so-called experimental model catalysts. These are well-defined systems. And of course, they know the loading, they know what is the orientation of the support. This is something that probably has evolved from more the surface science community, but they can control more the systems. But at the end of the day, I think the power is in the synergy of these three legs, where here at some point we have to make contact with the real system, without these powder systems. Like here, of course, the complexity, as you see, it's certainly there. And you may control the loading, but then you have many facets exposed. And what is I think that the idea is to try to disentangle with this modeling the effects of these factors or these other factors. So this is the scenario, and what I will discuss is mostly this connection. So why cerium oxide? So cerium oxide is the support. In general, it's not the active phase, but to have or not to have cerium oxide in the catalyst formulation makes a difference, as you will see. So cerium oxide is an insulator. All the cations are in the 4+ oxidation state. There is no F electrons. They have, everybody that has a car probably has some cerium oxide there. And it holds promise also for solid fuel cell technology. And the basic idea why this is functioning is because it's a bit like a sponge. So you can imagine the cerium oxide a bit like an oxygen sponge. We can take in and out oxygen very easily. And if I remove one oxygen atom, I take one neutral oxygen atom out, creating a defect, then I have 2 electrons left in the system. They will go and try to find a place to stay, and they will transfer, each of these electrons will go to one cation that will be transformed into 4+ to 3+. And this is a kind of polaron, we say, or this is a very localized electrons that it deforms the lattice. And how easy you can go from 4 to 3, this is this functionality. This is how easy you can reduce. So now we are trying to do some calculations, and this thing will happen. We will see this happening in the models. So somehow we need to find a methodology, and I will not discuss much on methodology, but a few words only. We will have to be able to describe this and also this. And this is challenging, and we do density functional theory, as most of you probably, and the choice of the computational method. So I want to describe this, a very localized F electron on a cation. This is a Ceria 3+ or polaron. And so DFT, you have to make a choice about the exchange and correlation, how we are going to describe this. And the standard so-called general gradient approximations, they will not work. This is an early work that we did with here. We were trying to face all this drama and say somehow this will certainly not work. And so here we have an expensive and a cheap option. So the computationally expensive option is to go to hybrid DFT, that is you add mixed exact exchange, Fock exchange, and this will localize, but the calculations are 100 times more expensive than this one. So you have to be worried about the computational time, or you can do this so-called DFT+U, which is basically a parameter which is equivalent to an on-site Coulomb repulsion. Basically, if I'm an F electron and he's an F electron, if he wants to come closer to me, he pays U. And this is exactly what it is, and this is what it does. So basically, it keeps electrons apart, and this is the thing that we use. And to show that this works, so here is the cerium 111 surface that you will see many times. So this is a simple surface, oxygen terminated with these oxygen, Ceria oxygen tri-layers. And this is the density of states of the surface where you have these F electrons, a narrow band, but it's empty in the oxygen 2p Ceria 5d gap. But now, if I remove any of these oxygens, I expect 2 electrons or 2 cations to be transformed to Ceria 3+. So this will not, I will get a metal if I do such a calculation. So I show you that, for example, the DFT+U works. So 2 states are pulled from this band into the valence band, and you have these 2 defect states that corresponds to these 2 Ceria 3+. So this is basically it. So it works. You get the localization of the charge. And this is important because these centers could be active sites, you know, or these could be centers that anchor metal or whatever, you know. So being able to localize charge is important. So that much for the methodology. So I want to show you some examples. And so one reaction we have been looking is the methane dry reforming. This reaction is important because you get the 2 greenhouse gases at once converted. So methane and CO2. So this is one that has interested you form synthesis gas, syngas, that you could use to produce other things. So this is a reaction that has interest. The other one that has really much interest is the direct oxidation of methane to methanol directly without going through syngas. So this is a real challenging. That's why people call the holy grail in C1 chemistry. So in trying to produce from methane and oxygen just methanol. So this is challenging, and I will show how and why. And the last thing we have been doing recently is using the same, but now instead of looking at oxygen, the oxidant, we look at hydrogen peroxide as the oxidant, and this in the liquid phase. So all the things here have in common the fact that you have to activate methane. And I said this is a stable molecule. So the problem here is the following. So you need very high temperature to activate methane. And there are things, for example, if you care about this reaction, there is the problem of the selectivity, because the reaction can go the way you want, but can go also this way, fully oxidation. And then the problem is that this reaction is favored at temperatures which are larger than 600 Kelvin. So, but you need these temperatures to activate the molecule. So you are trapped. So what you need to find is a catalyst that will activate methane at lower temperature. So that's the goal. And so this is Jose Rodriguez, some of you know from Brookhaven National Lab, and all of the things of experiments that I will show have been performed in his lab, with whom we have a very close collaboration. So I tell you what he tells me and the questions to him from the experiment. So I tell what he tells me. So he says, well, you know, I want to activate methane, and if I expose a nickel 111 extended nickel surface, I would need extremely higher temperatures. However, if I do a system which is low loaded ceria support with very little amount of nickel, he can construct this system. Then he says this can activate methane at room temperature. That's really astonishing. So this is what he has done, he's performed, and he came to us to try to understand the system. And so the question is, how does this system activate methane? So that was the question to the theoreticians like us. And so from the experiment, what else he found? So he tells me other details. He says that if he puts a low-loaded system, he, of course, evaporates metallic nickel, but when he looks at the XPS, the nickel is not metallic, it's oxidized. This is what he tells me. And then he exposed this system to methane, only methane, and he finds the following. So he finds here at room temperature 2 peaks, this peak and this peak. And what he tells is that these are really reflecting the fact that this reaction, fully dehydrogenation, has taken place, where you would have CHX and COX. Basically, it's certainly not only activated, but fully activated. So it's fully dehydrogenated. So he says these 2 peaks are the trace of that. And so this is the first result from the experiment. And now he increases the temperature 500, 700 Kelvin. And he looks now at the nickel and at the ceria. And what he tells is the following, that this is taking place because you see he starts with nickel 2+. In the atmosphere of methane, he increased the temperature when at room temperature when it's activated, and then he goes up the temperature with 700, and then this transformation takes place. The nickel becomes more metallic, and you have ceria that is partially reduced. So why this is relevant and how this is happening? Well, you see here we have a fully dehydrogenation, so we have these carbon atoms. And at room temperature, this will not happen. But if I increase the temperature to 700 Kelvin, because it is reducible, this carbon can pick up an oxygen from the lattice and generate CO and leave you a vacant site. And this is what they observed. So this is what you see at 700 Kelvin, the CO gas. So this is happening. And why this is good? It is good because at this temperature now, we care not only about activating methane, but we care about dry reforming, activating methane and CO2. So at room temperature, methane will be activated, but CO2 no. So when this carbon picks up an oxygen and leaves you a vacant site, any CO2 that sees a vacant site will be activated. And so the reaction that we care now is like this. So the reaction to be active for dry reforming, you have to increase the temperature. And it's true that now he can combine CO2 and methane, both gases on the same system. And now you see CO gas is only happening when you have 700 Kelvin. So the bottom line is that you would activate methane at room temperature, but you increase the temperature, and there you create these vacant sites and CO can form on the surface. So that's basically the story from the experiment. There is no coke and there is dry reforming activity. So this is so far from the experiment. So the question is that we're still left with the question, how it is methane activated. And okay, so low loading is also an ingredient that we learned. But if we increase the loading, or they increase the loading of the nickel, then you see the whole thing is gone, because here you start appearing these nickel carbides. So low loading and the presence of ceria, these are the two ingredients that are relevant for reactivity. And so we try to do some simulations, and okay, so we know that the system starts like this at room temperature. So he evaporates a metal on the ceria support, which is reducible. And then when he goes and measures, this nickel is oxidized. Okay, so we can try to do these calculations. And here is again the ceria 111 surface. And to here, I can sort of create my nanoparticle if you want. So this is a kind of toy model if you want, but still. So here I have a cluster of 4 nickel atoms on the ceria support. They happen to lie flat on the ceria support. But when I look at the calculations, I do see that 2 electrons have been transferred from the nickel to the ceria support. So this is a kind of strong metal support interaction if you want. So now the oxide is reduced and the nickel is oxidized. So though probably it's not the active phase, as I said, it's showing, because it is reducible, how the oxide can somehow affect the electronic structure of your metallic phase. And this, of course, tells you that the cerium oxide is non-innocent. It's non-innocent because we'll change the reactivity of the metal phase, so to speak. So this is what's happening. And so what we have done also, we have looked at this with Charlie Campbell at the University of Washington. So he's always interested about these metals on oxides and see. And then what he has looked is that actually the loading, in order to have these oxidized pieces, the low loading is important, or basically to say the interface. So if everything is interface, you will have more of these pieces. But if you increase the loading, on average, you will have a more metallic particles. And now this role of the interface is gone. I will not go into more details about it. But now the question is how this. So we understand that the ceria modifies the electronic structure of the metal when you have low loading and you have this direct contact. So now what about the activation of methane? So again, he would tell me that if you try to activate methane on an extended nickel surface, then you would need very high temperatures. So I can calculate an activation barrier and see how high it is, and it is very high. So this calculation, many people have done it. So you have 1 eV barrier, basically, to activate methane on an extended nickel surface. However, on my little toy model, I can activate methane on this cluster or nanoparticle on the ceria support, which, as I said, is being affected by the presence of this support. And I see that I have a barrier which is about almost 90% smaller. So this is clear that there is something there. So it's no wonder that this system will activate methane. and then you see a very strongly bound final state. So that is, I think that this tells you that the system certainly will enhance the reactivity towards breaking CH bonds. I mean, this is clear. The question is why? And I think theoreticians are like small kids. Why and why and why? Again, asking why it is so. And so what we try to find the details, what is this cerium oxide doing? That the things are different when you have these species. And the result is here. So let's look at the initial state. So methane approaches this nickel surface. These are distances in picometers. But now if we compare this system, the smaller nanoparticles on this reducible support, we see two things. First of all, you have a kind of fractionality of these clusters because they are small, they can do that. So we compare distances, and you see here, in this case, the methane can come much closer to the surface than in this case. And the reason is because here you have a kind of occupied d orbital that points like this, let's say. So this guy feels a Pauli repulsion coming to the surface. But here, remember, so things are different because there is charge transfer from the metal to the ceria support. So partially deoccupied d orbitals, so you have less repulsion. I will show you in another example. This can come closer. But because it can come closer, it has another effect that there is some charge transfer on the other direction. And you see this CH bond that actually is the one you want to break is already stretched in the initial state. So it certainly will cost you less to cleave that bond. And so these people, chemists, tells me that this is called a ligand effect, type of ligand effect. And so I think this is what we are seeing. And this is exactly how this molecule is activated on this system. And so we will see more details later. But so as I said, how about the rest? So this is the first hydrogen abstraction. This is very easy. So how about the next? And then experimentally, they say they see these two peaks, and they say this has to do with the fully dehydrogenation. So once it's activated, it's fully activated. So maybe it's not so good for selectivity, but still this is what's happening. And if I calculate barriers, this was the first hydrogen abstraction, but in what we found, we could not stabilize CH3 to CH2. Actually, in one shot, we lost 2 hydrogens with a moderate barrier to go, basically losing 2 hydrogens at once. So we try to remember this for the when we talk about selectivity, that actually once it's fully, when it's activated, it's fully activated. Okay, so this is the result, and now so we said we want to find structure activity relations or links in a way to see what we have learned. And here we have learned that reducible support is non-innocent. We say that low loading is important. We found out that these enhanced metal support interactions have an effect on the reactivity, and this is a link to this so-called ligand effect that influences the catalytic behavior. So the first question is that, okay, we understood this system. Is this unique? What we have learned, can we transfer? Can we make any prediction of any kind with this? And then we said, well, why not? So theoreticians can do many things. So we tried to see how about other systems. Platinum is a bit expensive, but we still can look at it. Cobalt. So are these systems behaving similar or different? So this you can do as a theoretician. So here we look, this was the nickel case, and now we see that there is the support is doing something, because now even platinum is also, there is charge transfer from the platinum to the ceria, from the cobalt to the ceria. So there is some likely that things will work similar ways. And we try to look at the activation of methane. So we do the calculation, and you see this one was the barrier we had before, and here platinum, also a small barrier, cobalt, also a small barrier, very small barriers compared to the extended metal surfaces. So, I mean, from the point of view of the theoretician, if you ask me, I would say this should work. And so I'm convinced that if it's all true what I say, these systems should also have a significant probability to activate CH bonds. And so here at this point, I would like to make one stop to tell a bit that, of course, these days, calculating these barriers takes a lot of energy, time, computer time. So if we could find some relations between all these numbers, maybe we are good and we don't need to calculate every time all these barriers. And so establishing relationships is good. I'm not against. And I think in this era of data-driven learning and finding correlations is something we all want. And I think use all this data for something. But I want to make one warning, I would say, and finding correlations, particularly in terms of reactivity, Jens Norskov is a master. And so this is Jens in the group of at the DTU, many of you know him. So he has mastered all the scaling relations and reactivity. So in this particular case, he would say there has to be a correlation between activation energy and reaction energy. So this is what you expect. So he has published and he has these correlations for methane activation, actually. And this is what he finds. So he tells me that, so these are the metals, nickel extended, platinum, cobalt, these points. So you see linear correlation, very nice. So these are all his points. This is his work. And so he tells me that the initial state in all the cases that I will show what they are is very, very not strongly bound with methane. It's kind of flying. So basically he finds a correlation between not the activation energy, but actually because this is very small. So he just looks at the transition state energy and the final state. So this is good because calculating the final state is easy, relatively easy. You don't have to look for transition state structure, optimize, etc. So if you give me any CH3 plus hydrogen in any system, you can go here and say, okay, this is this here. So you can more or less estimate your transition state structure. The lower the binding of the final state, the lower the barrier. So that would be good. I mean, if such a correlation you have, this is perfect. So the question is, you have to be a bit careful with these correlations. I'm not saying these are not good. I'm saying that careful. And because the question is, how about our systems, this metallic nickel on series support? So if they were not included. So here they were included systems like nickel, cobalt, platinum, etc., and then some oxides, non-reducible oxides, etc. So we go and try to put our numbers in this plot, and we find that, for example, let's say the case of platinum, so the activation barrier that we calculated is 1 eV smaller than predicted. So somehow, using these correlations, you could not have guessed that this is a kind of new class of material, in a way. Some people tell me that there should be another linear correlation for that class, you know? There's always somewhere. But okay, so certainly you could have missed that one because you wouldn't have been able to predict that. And and the reason why it is so is because, this is something that Charlie used to say. And so he says that actually he likes to say that these systems are a new class of systems that escape these linear relations. And the reason why it is so is because, as I told you before, so in all these systems, this linear relation is based that the methane is practically non-bound on the system. But the whole point here on these systems is that they are activated at the initial state. So you see, this is the case of platinum, and this very strongly bound. And so we have this CH bond, which is kind of stretched already at the initial state. So this is not done in this previous system. So in the case of platinum, it's the same as we had before. So here we have platinum, and here we have platinum 111. Again, this can come closer. You know, the argument is similar. It's the same ligand effect. So we have the CH bond, which is already stretched. And look at these fluxional small catalysts, small particles. So they are very fluxional on the surface. You have the charge transfer. the same thing. And here, this is our active site, and we have projected the density of states on that particular atom. And you see this orbital here is deoccupied because of the charge transfer, and it looks, if I plot this narrow orbital looks like that, and this is empty. So this is the molecule when it comes, it sees less repulsion, certainly, and this is the same for all the systems. So I think this is, so having this, so Jose and his group, they have looked at this nickel, as I told you, with these two peaks. And then we said, well, how about looking experimentally? As I said, this is the kind of feedback between theory and experiment, and we have calculated all that and said, well, Jose, look, what about platinum? What about cobalt? So they have looked at it, and they both work, you know. Thanks, God. So platinum works, you see, it both reduces low loading, etc. The same cobalt, again, low loading, you have the two peaks, and everything is methane at room temperature. So they all work. So I think that, so now, as I said, these systems was all about activating methane, but the whole point here was doing dry reforming. So as I said, room temperature activation is fine, but now you have to increase a bit the temperature to have dry reforming, and they have done it experimentally, and you see this is this. So this is what we have done, the calculations, but then they have the two gases, and they look at dry reforming, increased temperature, as I said, low loading, and you see copper doesn't work. I will not discuss why now, but the nickel works, cobalt even better, and platinum, of course, you always expect to be better. And you see dry reforming works. There's no problem with that. And they even went, as I said, one step further, and they tried to look at this powder catalyst. And what they tell me is now they have this Platinum-ceria powder catalyst, and you see over time the reaction works. There is no deactivation. So far they could test it, and you see that also they increase the temperature, and you have the reaction rate increases. So I think this is the type of thing we like to do. Sometimes we start from the model systems, or we start from the theory, and we have this feedback between theory and experiment, trying to understand exactly at the atomic scale how things work. So this was one first story. The next story is the direct oxidation of methane to methanol. So we want to activate methane. We know how to, and now we want to have selectivity for this reaction. So this starts with experiment. So what they tell me is the following. First of all, as I said, we try to remember that methane, we know how to activate it, but we fully activate it. But we want to have this reaction, methane, methoxy, methanol. So if methane loses all the hydrogens, I have to stop it somewhere. So that's this is the problem of the selectivity with this reaction. So what Jose tells me is the following. So he says we have these two possibilities, and he says if there is no water, just simply methane and oxygen, so there will be practically no methanol. So it goes here, CO, CO2. However, he figures out that he puts some water, then the selectivity can improve up to 30%. So this may sound not too much, but for this type of systems, the higher selectivity found. Of course, you can improve on that, but this is what he found. So the question to us was the following, is how does methoxy form, and what is the role of water? So this is what we try to understand. So about water, so first of all, I need to know that my system works for activating water. We know CH bonds are fine. What about OH bonds? And yes, OH bonds, very nice. It's a work we have done a while ago already. So water can be activated at this oxidized interface through to these metal support interactions, and the barrier is very small. So the system is a kind of win-win, because you can activate OH, but also activate CH. Okay, so now everybody gets activated, and here we have methane loses all the hydrogens, water can get activated, and oxygen has no barrier on this oxygen. So how the question stays, how we stop with methoxy and how water helps. So what we do is we put all together, and let's see what happens. basically we start calculating barriers, but we start with our nickel system. We have a bit of oxygen on top, and we see how it goes. And I will walk you through this. So first of all, this is the same system where we have one oxygen. And here we activate methane adsorbs and activates. The barrier is a bit different, a bit larger, but because we have this oxygen, but certainly these are moderate barriers. And here we have CH3. And now the question is, CH3 to CH2 or CH3 to methoxy? So I can calculate these two barriers and see what I get. So the bad news is that CH3 to CH2 has a lower barrier. This I don't like. So then I put the water. So then I put the water molecule, adsorbs, dissociates, etc. Here, same question, CH3 to CH2, CH3 to methoxy. Again, bad news. Another water molecule. And so there we are. Here methoxy can form, but then I will not bother you with there is some kind of reorganization at the surface and with lower barriers. Certainly these are some details there, but then methanol can form on the surface with a barrier which is a bit high. But then we figure out that if we put another water molecule, then this water molecule could give the hydrogen that you need this methoxy to kick them out of the surface, and it goes out in the gas phase with a barrier which is actually half of it. So basically, if we go to this path, what this water is doing, instead of going up, it's going down. So somehow it changes the path. It changes the reactivity of the system. And as I told you, how does it do that? Because OH groups are being dissociated at the same right interface that CH3 is losing the hydrogen. So basically, water somehow blocks those sites where CH3 can lose the hydrogen by staying there. Basically, it's a kind of blocking effect. And the last one provides the hydrogen that you need to go to the gas phase. So I think this is a kind of nice story. And you know, this is the way it goes. It's a kind of cartoon. So methane adsorbs one water there, the other one there, does a loop, and comes the last one, gives the hydrogen and kicks it out. So basically, these are the structures we have optimized. And I think this is the way we saw it. So basically, these OH groups prevents the full decomposition of the CH groups. And okay, so this is our understanding, but then we can go back to Jose and say, well, this is what we think. So what about this? Can you put water and see that it's blocked or not? And so the thing is this, that you saw these two peaks, COX, CHX. So this is the proof that this has fully dehydrogenated. This is just methane, room temperature. But now they put methane and water, and this peak disappears. That this peak disappeared, that means that you have some CHX, but you know this peak has disappeared because you have blocked the sites where this thing can lose all the hydrogen. So I think this is the way we have understood the system. And so I think that with these type of systems, I think we have been, of course, we now are looking at other ways to modulating. So another thing that you can imagine is to say, well, how about alloying? So you could try to see nickel or any system and then try to look at alloys. Because this one, if you combine it with gold, let's say, this will block also. It could be also a bit of an ensemble effect, you know. You could imagine these things happening the same. So, and maybe this is even better than 30% reactivity like water does, you know. So now that you have understood that what you have to block, etc., to avoid the full decompositions, we can play games that maybe try to block this full decomposition of the system. And in the final, so I think I have what, 10 minutes, so less. So I will finish with a kind of last story. So there we say, how about this is something also with a group of Jose Rodriguez. So they have looked at this. This is more complex, I would say. And so here they have methane, and then hydrogen peroxide, I say, peroxide, and this is in the liquid phase. So don't ask me about many details about the experiment, but they tell me the following, that this is a very simple way of synthesis, a mechanochemical synthesis of this catalyst. And what they have is actually the metal phase is palladium now. This is on a series support. And what they found is that in the middle or at the interface, they have a kind of carbon layer. So basically, this is this palladium carbon kind of interface in the interface between palladium and zinc. Okay, fine. This is the model. This is a system. And so what is important here is that this system now with this carbon, now here is 75 degrees C, you have 100% selectivity. This is what they find. And if you have the same system without this carbon, this is CO2, fully oxidized. Believe it or not, this is what they say. So this is the result, and then basically it's clear that this palladium is extremely active, and so the idea to modulate or somehow make it less reactive to reduce the oxidative potential, then this carbon layer does something. So of course, like always, like I was telling Gunther today, the experimentalists have all of this, and they come and say, can you explain how this thing? And then, so this is becoming more complex, I would say, because we have this liquid phase, and because we have this carbon, and they don't tell you exactly how it is. But nevertheless, we can try to make a kind of toy model and see how far we can go. And then, so we know how to make models for metals on ceria without this carbon. And we basically did a kind of carbon anchoring through this palladium somehow anchoring to the metal through the carbon. So this is our model with this carbon layer, so to speak. And this is without. So now we have two things to activate: methane on the palladium. We hope it will be exactly as we saw for the other systems. And the question is, how about this carbon layer? So the first thing we find, this is in red, we have with a carbon layer, and this is without the carbon layer. So first of thing, we see that the molecules are less bound when you have a carbon layer, which turns out to be positive, and I will tell you why. And also is more difficult to break this molecule, to activate the molecule, compared to not having it. And also, if we get the hydrogen peroxide, then we see that it's very strongly bound when you don't have the carbon, and the reaction energy is extremely high, very exothermic reaction. So basically, this will be fully covered by OH, because this will dissociate with no barrier. Here, you have less strongly bound species. So basically, the carbon is doing something that the reactions are less exothermic and the species are less strongly bound. And this has consequences when you try to avoid the overreactivity of the system. And so experimentally, what they found is that this is actually the composition rate of hydrogen peroxide on the system, and you see it has a rate which is higher when you don't have the carbon than when you do have. So this will be in line with this finding. So the system without the carbon is very, very reactive. And we try to look at what is the reason, why it is so. And what we found is the following. This is this ligand effect we have found, always like the same as the other ones. But we see here that having this carbon somehow avoids this ligand effect. So there is less charge transfer to the support, a bit like a barrier. So now we have more Pauli repulsion, is less strongly bound than in this case. So in this case, I will tell you why this happens to be important. And now if we look at the hydrogen peroxide system, this again, in this case, comes closer to the surface than when you have the carbon. And now this is the charge difference plot upon adsorption. And you see, in this case, it involves the support for sure. And in this case, there is no involvement with the support. Basically, this really makes a barrier to the charge transfer. The charge is being kept in the system, in the catalytic system. And this, because now this is something that is in the liquid phase. And actually you have this OH or this hydrogen peroxide in the liquid phase. So the way we found that the reaction goes best is when this thing comes from the liquid phase a bit in the spirit of an radial mechanism, that these OHs that they are in the liquid phase come and pick up a less bound CH3 and makes methanol very easily. And this is the way we found it works. We have looked at other ways, but so this is the way we imagine. So these are these OHs, which is it happened to be dissociated in this model, but it goes in and out. So we can make a toy model of a solvation in a way. So we have this molecule, this oxidized molecule. We put some waters around and we land it on it and see what happens. And so the system has CH3 that in this case with the carbon is less bound. And what indeed we see, and we're not going to the details of all this reactivity, but the very first thing is that this guy kind of pick up the CH3 and makes a methanol, which is a kind of unstable, but immediately does it. Then goes back and do some other things and to finally form methanol in the gas phase with a very low barrier. So I will, as I said, these are the cartoons of the structures we have optimized, but basically we have in blue with the carbon and in black without the carbon. And we see here, again, as I said, there are some intermediate steps here, but actually this is very easy to form and to desorb this methanol when it comes basically like this and picks, this less bound CH3 species, this OHs makes methanol very easily compared to this case, because everything is less bound on the surface, and this hydrogen that you need to form the methanol at the end, this one here, this is a hydrogen which is less bound than which is in this interface here. So I think that we have found, the role of the water molecules when you have the liquid phase. I think that's interesting to have seen it, and how you can control selectivity either by making a kind of like we had before, either with water, but here having this interface is also a way to control the high reactivity of these systems and to move it to high selectivity. So this is a bit the story. And so first of all, to this last part, Pablo Lustenberg, some of you know, and Estefania, they have done most of the calculations, and it has been a collaboration with a group of Alessandro Trovarelli and the group of Jose Rodriguez. So this, we are happy with those results. And from the first part, we have been working with all these many experimentalists. They take too many people to go to a synchrotron, I guess. So these are all the people that have one way or another in different stages collaborated in this context. So Charlie here, and then Jose and his group there. And so, of course, enormous amount of computer time, funding, and you for your attention.